All right, everyone, we're going to talk about one really important social context that shapes our world. And you, again, link this back to the broad idea of social structures. This is one way of making sense of and thinking about social structures. And that is through social networks. So what are social networks? Let's start by talking about that. What are social networks? When you think about what social networks are, it kind of has the imagery, or it's exactly what you're probably imagining. Some set of durable interconnections between people. Sets of relationships between people, your friends, right? That would be one core kind of social network. The people that you're interacting with as your friends. The people at your workplace that you interact with and that you have relationships with are another kind of social network. You can have you have social networks with family members and extended family members. You have social networks with people inside of your schools and classrooms, right? All of those represent kinds of social networks. These are just durable sets of interconnections, relationships that people have with each other in some kind of social setting. Now, there is a whole subfield of social network analysis within sociology, and it actually has its tentacles out in lots of the social sciences. And so it has its own actual own kind of language that it uses to talk about social networks. We're not going to delve incredibly deep inside, especially of that language, but instead take a broad kind of overview of what it is that social networks are about and how we can use that to make sense of our social world. Now, there's two basic principles we need to talk about and understand the impact and importance of social networks. The first is that social networks are not random. It's not by chance or happenstance that you are friends with the people that you're friends with, that you have the connections and relationships with people that you have relationships with. So that's sort of the fact number one. The second social principle here is that network structure matters. It's not just who you're friends with or who you're connected to, but also who those people are connected to. The broader structure of the network, it can really exert an important impact on individual outcomes and what happens to us. So let's start with that first principle. Networks are not random. And the core idea you need to understand out of this is the principle of homophily. And if you take that word homophily, it's really got it sort of, it's got a Greek origin where homo simply means the same. It's a prefix, a Greek prefix for the same. And phily or phily is a tendency towards something, right? That's a Greek suffix. Meaning a tendency towards something. So you put that together and what we have is a tendency towards sameness. And so that's what homophily is about. You've heard this principle before, that birds of a feather flock together. You tend to be connected to people who on some important salient dimension are like you. If you think back to your childhood, who you were really good friends with, this likely had a gendered component. That is to say, girls tend to be friends with other girls, boys tend to be friends with other boys. And so there's a kind of gendered, or gender becomes an important status characteristic that then shapes who you become friends with. This is also true for other kind of characteristics like race or age. And we can think actually of the broad array of status characteristics in this dimension. You can also think about other kind of salient identities or interests. Athletes tend to be friends with other athletes in the school. This is how we can think about cliques within particular schools, for example, where the jocks hang out with the jocks and the nerds hang out with the nerds, right? And that is based upon this principle of homophily, that there tends to be a kind of attraction pulling us towards people who on important socially salient dimensions are like us. So it's not random who we become interconnected with, but we tend to have a pattern of homophily so that we are connected to people who on important salient dimensions are like us. Now that's one important principle. Another is to think about the network structure as a whole. When we just were talking about this, we tend to talk about an ego network, which is focused in on a single person and who they're connected to. But it's not just about who you are connected to, but the broader pattern of ties amongst all of those who are in your social network. So it's not just who you're connected with, but also who the people you're connected with are also connected to, who your friends are friends with, for example. And this raises, there's actually a whole array of different kinds of, or different concepts that we use to think about and talk about the importance of network structure. I'm going to talk about one that we talk about very often, and that is network centrality. Don't treat this as the only property of network structure, but it is an important and particularly powerful property of network structure. Network centrality. And this actually tells us who in the network is most central, or who is connected to the most people inside of that network, oftentimes without them being connected to each other. And this provides us with a way to identify who can be most powerful or influential inside of a social network. So if you just look at this graph here, you can see that Jill is particularly central inside of this network. The reason that she is so central is that she, for example, is connected to Mike at the top. And Jill is also connected to Leah at the bottom, but Mike and Leah do not have any direct connections with each other. Right? So Jill can get information from Mike, who can get information from and can get information from Leah, while Mike and Leah don't have any connection to each other. Right? It's also the case, for example, that Jill is connected to Bob, while Bob is also not connected to Leah. Bob is also not connected to Shane, while Jill is connected to both of those individuals. So we talk about Jill as being particularly influential in this network because she has a relationship with more of the people inside of that network. Right? And so this can oftentimes give her power, can give her insight, so she can capture more information. She can know things that Mike knows, but that Leah does not know, and she can know things that Leah knows, but that Mike does not know. So this maximizes or expands out at least the amount of information about what's going on with her friends or others in the network that she knows about, right? And she can also, this gives her power, she can play Mike off of Leah. And the network's not structured exactly to provide this because Mike is indirectly connected to Leah. But she can, for example, if she knows something that Leah knows, but that Mike does not know, this can give her power in her relationship with Mike to use that information in ways that Mike might, if he know that information, not otherwise might not like. So these are a couple of ways of thinking about social networks. Again, this is one way to think about. This provides us with a few of the kind of broad concepts that network analysts have for thinking about social networks. And really, quite frankly, we've barely scratched the surface here in understanding the broad array of concepts and ideas that social network analysis can give us. Now, we've also been talking about social networks in terms of people, but we can think about networks among lots of different kinds of social entities. Things like organizations or nation states. And social network analysts have a language for talking about that abstractly, where we talk about that as a node, right? So a person, an organization, a nation state, all of those can be nodes in a network. So Jill and Mike and Bob here all represent nodes. And then they talk about the lines running across them or their connections as edges. And then you can talk about directed and indirect edges, and there's a whole broad array of ways of thinking about this. So I just wanted to sort of give you some way to think about this at the outset, and the importance of thinking both about this principle of homophily and the importance of thinking about network structure. All right, so I'll talk to you guys later.